6 months after exposing the medical malpractice scandal, I thought I'd earned some peace in Ocean City. I was wrong. The devastating call came from my own mother, Margaret Richardson, who just discovered she'd been the victim of international charity fraud. "Emma, I need your help," she sobbed into the phone. "I think I've been scammed out of my entire retirement fund." My mother had always been generous to a fault. When she saw the emotional commercials for Global Hope Foundation on CNN and BBC promising to help disaster victims worldwide, she couldn't resist. They said they were building schools in war zones, providing clean water in Africa, rescuing children from trafficking, she explained tearfully. "I donated $75,000, everything I had saved." The Global Hope Foundation had an impressive website filled with heart-wrenching videos of rescue operations, before and after photos of successful projects, and testimonials from grateful families around the world. Their CEO, Dr. Michael Harrison, was frequently featured on international news programs discussing humanitarian crises and the foundation's heroic interventions in disaster zones. "What made you suspicious?" I asked my mother as we sat in my office, reviewing the paperwork she'd received from the foundation. "I tried to contact the school they said they built with my donation in Bangladesh. When I finally reached someone there, they'd never heard of Global Hope Foundation. The school I supposedly funded doesn't exist." Her voice cracked. "Emma, I think they lied about everything. I began my investigation the same way I always did, by following the money." Global Hope Foundation's tax filings showed they'd collected over $200 million in donations over the past 5 years. According to their reports, 95% of donations went directly to humanitarian projects worldwide. But when I dug deeper into their financial records, I found something disturbing. The foundation's largest expenses weren't for disaster relief or building projects. They were payments to something called Global Media Solutions, a company that turned out to be owned by Dr. Harrison himself. Over $150 million had been funneled to this media company, supposedly for awareness campaigns and documentation of humanitarian work. But what was this company really doing with all that money? I called my private investigator friend Jack Riley. "Jack, I need you to look into a charity called Global Hope Foundation and their CEO, Dr. Michael Harrison. Something doesn't add up about their finances. Charity fraud case?" He asked, "Possibly the biggest one I've ever seen. They've collected hundreds of millions claiming to help disaster victims worldwide. I'll start digging, give me 48 hours. While Jack investigated Harrison's background, I decided to trace some of the foundation's claimed projects. Their website featured a video about building a hospital in earthquake-devastated Haiti, complete with dramatic footage of construction and interviews with local officials thanking Global Hope for their generosity. But when I contacted the Haiti Ministry of Health, they had no record of any such hospital. "We have never worked with Global Hope Foundation," the ministry official told me via email. "The hospital shown in their video is actually a government facility that was built with UN funding 3 years ago. We have no idea why they are claiming credit for our hospital." This was my first concrete proof that the foundation was lying about their projects. Jack called back with disturbing news about Dr. Harrison. "Emma, this guy's background is completely fabricated. He claims to have a doctorate in international development from Oxford University, but Oxford has no record of him ever attending. His supposed previous work with Doctors Without Borders, they've never heard of him either. And here's the really interesting part: before starting Global Hope, he ran a marketing company that specialized in viral video content. A marketing company that specialized in viral videos. That explained a lot about Global Hope's slick promotional materials and emotional social media campaigns. But it also suggested something more sinister. What if Harrison wasn't just stealing donations, but actually creating fake humanitarian crises to generate more sympathy and donations? I decided to investigate some of the foundation's most recent emergency response campaigns. 3 months earlier, Global Hope had launched a massive fundraising campaign for Operation Child Rescue, claiming to have saved 500 children from trafficking rings in Southeast Asia. The campaign featured dramatic video footage of rescue operations, interviews with saved children, and emotional appeals from Dr. Harrison himself. Within 2 weeks, they'd raised over $10 million for the operation. But when I tried to verify the rescue operation with local authorities in Thailand and Cambodia, I hit a wall. No police departments had any record of working with Global Hope Foundation. The supposed rescue operations had never happened. Even more disturbing, the rescued children in their videos appeared to be child actors reading from scripts, not actual trafficking victims. I realized I was looking at something much bigger than charity fraud. Global Hope Foundation was essentially running a fake news operation, creating completely fictional humanitarian crises and rescue operations, then selling these stories to international media outlets while simultaneously using them to raise donations from sympathetic viewers around the world. To prove my theory, I needed to trace how these fake stories were getting into legitimate news outlets. I started by examining media coverage of Global Hope's supposed projects over the past year. What I found was shocking. Their fake rescue operations and humanitarian projects had been featured on CNN, BBC, Reuters, Al Jazeera, and dozens of other major news organizations. How are prestigious news organizations falling for these fake stories? I decided to pose as a freelance journalist and contact Global Hope's media relations department. Within hours, I received a professional media package complete with high-quality video footage, official-looking documents, and contact information for Dr. Harrison's field coordinators who could provide expert commentary on humanitarian crises. The media package was incredibly sophisticated. It included what appeared to be drone footage of disaster zones, interviews with local officials who I now suspected were actors, and detailed statistics about the foundation's impact. For busy journalists working on tight deadlines, this ready-made content package would be irresistible, especially since it came from a seemingly reputable international charity. I called the BBC journalist who had written several articles about Global Hope's work. "I'm investigating the foundation for a potential expose," I told him. "How did you verify the information they provided for your articles?" There was a long pause. "They provided all the documentation and video evidence. Dr. Harrison himself was available for interviews. We had no reason to doubt their credibility." "Did you independently verify any of their claims or contact local authorities in the areas where they supposedly worked?" I asked. Another pause. "We relied on their documentation and the fact that they'd been featured in other major outlets." In hindsight, perhaps we should have done more verification. The journalist sounded increasingly uncomfortable as he realized he might have been duped. I was beginning to understand the full scope of Global Hope's operation. They weren't just fooling individual donors, they were manipulating the entire international news cycle. By creating fake humanitarian stories and feeding them to multiple news outlets simultaneously, they were essentially manufacturing global sympathy for crises that didn't exist, then profiting from the resulting donations. But why would Dr. Harrison go to such elaborate lengths just to steal charity donations? There had to be more to this operation. I decided to dig deeper into Global Media Solutions, the company that was receiving most of Global Hope's funds. What I found revealed the true scope of Harrison's ambitions. He wasn't just running a charity scam, he was running a global influence operation. Global Media Solutions was connected to a network of fake news websites, social media influence campaigns, and even political lobbying firms. Harrison was using the foundation's humanitarian cover to insert himself into international political discussions, providing expert analysis on conflicts and crises that he was simultaneously fabricating. He was literally creating news to serve his own agenda. I realized that some of the humanitarian crises Global Hope had responded to had actually influenced real political decisions. Their fake reports about conditions in various countries had been cited by politicians and used to justify policy changes. Harrison wasn't just stealing money, he was manipulating international relations and potentially affecting the lives of millions of people. I needed concrete proof of the fake news operation before I could expose Harrison. I decided to apply for a job at Global Media Solutions, using a fake identity and resume. Within a week, I was invited for an interview at their sleek offices in downtown Manhattan. The building looked like any other corporate headquarters, but I was about to discover the heart of a global deception operation. During my interview, I was shown around the facility and introduced to different departments. There was a video production studio where they created rescue operation footage using actors and green screens. There was a graphics department that specialized in creating fake government documents and official-looking certificates. And there was a social media team that managed hundreds of fake accounts across multiple platforms. Our job is to create compelling narratives that drive engagement and donations, my potential supervisor explained, apparently unaware that I was recording our conversation. We find that emotional rescue stories perform much better than traditional charity appeals. People don't just want to donate money, they want to feel like they're part of something heroic and meaningful. I was offered the job and spent 2 weeks working inside Global Media Solutions, documenting their operations with hidden cameras and audio recorders. What I witnessed was a sophisticated propaganda machine that could create and distribute fake humanitarian stories to global audiences within hours. They had contacts at major news outlets who would run their stories with minimal fact-checking. The most disturbing aspect of the operation was how systematic it was. Harrison's team had identified which types of humanitarian crises generated the most sympathy and donations. Child trafficking, natural disasters, and war refugees topped the list. They would create fictional versions of these crises, complete with fake victim testimonials and fabricated government responses. I also discovered that Global Hope wasn't Harrison's only fake charity. He was running at least 6 other humanitarian organizations, each targeting different types of donors and different geographical regions. The total amount of fraud was staggering. Over the past 5 years, Harrison's network had stolen more than $500 million in donations while simultaneously corrupting international news coverage. After 2 weeks of gathering evidence, I had everything I needed to expose Harrison's operation. But I knew that simply releasing the information wouldn't be enough. The story was so complex and the implications so far-reaching that I needed major media outlets to investigate and verify my findings independently. The irony wasn't lost on me. I needed the same news organizations that had been fooled by Harrison to help expose him. I contacted investigative journalists at The Washington Post, New York Times, and Guardian simultaneously, providing each with a comprehensive package of evidence including video recordings, financial documents, and detailed timelines of fake stories. Within 24 hours, all 3 outlets had assigned teams to verify my findings and expand the investigation. The media investigation moved quickly. Journalists began contacting the local officials and organizations that Global Hope claimed to work with around the world. Every single project and rescue operation turned out to be fabricated. The supposed refugee camps didn't exist. The rescued children were actors. The grateful families giving testimonials had been paid to read scripts. Meanwhile, Harrison had no idea that his operation was being exposed. Global Hope continued running fundraising campaigns and feeding fake stories to news outlets right up until the moment the first exposed article was published. The Washington Post headline read, "Global Charity Scam: How Fake Humanitarian Stories Fooled the World and Stole Millions." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Within hours of the article's publication, Global Hope's website crashed as thousands of angry donors tried to access information about their donations. Social media exploded with people sharing the story and demanding to know how major news outlets had been so easily deceived. Harrison himself went into hiding, canceling all public appearances and interviews. The FBI launched an investigation within 48 hours, freezing Global Hope's bank accounts and raiding their offices. What they found confirmed everything in my investigation and more: detailed plans for expanding the fake news operation internationally, contracts with political lobbying firms, and evidence of coordination with foreign influence campaigns in multiple countries. Harrison was arrested at his Hamptons estate while trying to flee the country with suitcases full of cash and fake passports. The arrest footage showed him being led away in handcuffs while reporters shouted questions about the hundreds of millions of dollars he'd stolen from donors who thought they were helping disaster victims and refugees. The legal proceedings revealed the full extent of Harrison's crimes. In addition to charity fraud and wire fraud, he was charged with conspiracy to commit election interference. Some of his fake humanitarian stories had been designed to influence public opinion about specific political candidates and policies. The case became one of the largest fraud prosecutions in U.S. history. The media reckoning was equally dramatic. News organizations around the world were forced to retract dozens of stories based on Global Hope's fabricated information. Several high-profile journalists lost their jobs for failing to verify sources. Media companies implemented new fact-checking protocols specifically designed to prevent similar deceptions in the future. During Harrison's trial, prosecutors revealed that his operation had been even more sophisticated than anyone realized. He had used artificial intelligence to generate fake testimonials and had employed deepfake technology to create video evidence of humanitarian crises. The case became a watershed moment for discussions about fake news and media manipulation in the digital age. Harrison was ultimately sentenced to 35 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $750 million in restitution to victims. His network of fake charities was completely dismantled, and dozens of accomplices received prison sentences. But the damage to public trust in both charitable organizations and news media would take years to repair. My mother was among thousands of donors who received partial restitution from the government's seizure of Harrison's assets. While she couldn't recover her full donation, she was able to salvage about half of her retirement savings. More importantly, she had learned valuable lessons about verifying charitable organizations before donating. The Global Hope case led to significant reforms in charity oversight and media verification procedures. New laws required international charitable organizations to undergo more rigorous auditing, and news organizations implemented stricter source verification protocols. Technology companies also develop better tools for detecting fake videos and fabricated documents. For me personally, the case marked a turning point in my career. The success of the investigation led to offers from several major law firms and media organizations. But I decided to stay in Ocean City and focus on cases involving institutional fraud and corruption. There seemed to be no shortage of powerful people and organizations willing to deceive the public for profit. The Global Hope scandal also had international implications. Several countries launched their own investigations into Harrison's network and discovered that his fake news operation had influenced policy decisions and public opinion around the world. The case became a catalyst for international cooperation on combating disinformation and propaganda. 3 years later, I still receive calls from potential fraud victims who've seen news coverage of the Global Hope case. The investigation taught me that in our interconnected world, fraud operations can be global in scope and incredibly sophisticated. But it also showed me that determined investigation and honest journalism can still expose even the most elaborate deceptions. Looking back on the case, what struck me most was how Harrison had exploited people's genuine desire to help others. He had turned human compassion into a weapon for personal enrichment and political manipulation. In many ways, that felt like a more serious crime than simply stealing money. He had corrupted the very instinct that makes humanitarian work possible. The victims of Harrison's fraud weren't just the individual donors who lost money. They were also the legitimate humanitarian organizations that saw public trust in charity work decline as a result of the scandal. They were the journalists whose reputations were damaged by their failure to fact-check Harrison's stories. And they were the people in actual crisis zones whose real suffering became harder to address. Today, when I see news coverage of humanitarian crises around the world, I find myself automatically questioning the sources and verification methods. The Global Hope case made me more skeptical, but also more appreciative of honest journalism and legitimate humanitarian work. It's a reminder that in an age of sophisticated deception, critical thinking and careful verification are more important than ever. The case also reinforced my belief that corruption and fraud thrive in darkness but cannot survive in the light of investigation and transparency. Harrison's operation seemed invincible until people started asking the right questions and demanding real evidence. That's a lesson I carry with me into every case I take on as a lawyer and investigator. As I write the story 5 years after Harrison's conviction, Global Hope Foundation has become a case study taught in journalism schools and law enforcement academies around the world. It serves as a reminder of how quickly false information can spread in our connected world, but also how the truth can ultimately prevail when people are willing to dig for it. The media landscape has changed significantly since the Global Hope scandal. News organizations now routinely fact-check charity claims and humanitarian stories before publication. Social media platforms have implemented algorithms to detect and flag potentially false humanitarian content. And donor verification services have made it easier for people to research charitable organizations before giving money. But perhaps the most important change has been in public awareness. Donors are now more skeptical of emotional appeals and more likely to research organizations before contributing. People understand that sophisticated fraudsters can create convincing fake evidence and that even prestigious news outlets can be deceived. This increased skepticism has made it harder for fraudsters to operate. The Global Hope case also led to international cooperation agreements on combating charity fraud and fake news operations. Law enforcement agencies now share information more effectively about suspicious humanitarian organizations, and media outlets have established networks for verifying international stories. These changes have made it much more difficult for operations like Harrison's to succeed. For my mother, the experience was ultimately educational rather than devastating. While she lost a significant amount of money, she became an advocate for donor education and frequently speaks to community groups about how to avoid charity fraud. She's also become more involved with local charitable organizations where she can see the direct impact of her contributions. The investigation taught me valuable lessons about the intersection of technology, media, and fraud in the modern world. Harrison's operation succeeded because it exploited the speed and interconnectedness of global communications. But those same technologies also made it possible to expose him once investigators knew what to look for. I often think about how many other operations like Global Hope might still be active around the world. The case showed how easy it can be for sophisticated fraudsters to manipulate public opinion and steal millions of dollars while hiding behind humanitarian causes. It's a reminder that vigilance and skepticism are essential tools for protecting both individual donors and democratic institutions. The Global Hope Foundation case became a defining moment in my career and in the broader fight against sophisticated fraud operations. It showed me that the most dangerous criminals are often those who wrap themselves in the flag of noble causes while pursuing purely selfish ends. But it also demonstrated that careful investigation and honest reporting can still triumph over even the most elaborate deceptions. Today, whenever I see emotional appeals for humanitarian donations, I remember my mother's tears when she realized she'd been deceived. I think about the legitimate aid workers whose jobs became harder because of decreased public trust. And I remind myself that protecting people from fraud isn't just about money, it's about preserving the trust and compassion that make humanitarian work possible in the first place. The case files from Global Hope Foundation investigation now fill an entire cabinet in my office, serving as a reminder of how complex and far-reaching modern fraud operations can be. But they also represent something positive, proof that determined investigation can expose even the most sophisticated criminals and help protect future victims from similar schemes. As I continue my work as an attorney, the lessons from the Global Hope case influence every investigation I undertake. I've learned to question official-looking documents, to verify emotional stories, and to follow money trails wherever they lead. Most importantly, I've learned that in a world full of sophisticated deception, the simple commitment to finding and telling the truth remains our most powerful weapon against fraud and corruption.